Frank, I want to start with you because we have seen what happens when his base is riled. And he believes that riling of his base is good for him politically. You add on that the attacks we have seen on the FBI, Trump pulling out all the stops, not just for his defense, but for political gain. Talk us through the dangers of having someone who won't think twice about fanning the flames of anti-government extremism when they believe it benefits them.
Yeah, Alicia, I fear we're in for a tough fall and winter if he indeed decides to announce his candidacy. Look, while people feel really comfortable saying that the FBI and DOJ have politicized themselves through their actions, it's really the reverse through the lens that I see it, which means that it's Trump and people who are under investigation by those entities who are intent on politicizing them for their own purpose. And of course, Trump has demonstrated he's really keen on raising funds through disinformation. Rule number one of a good conspiracy theory, like, hey, they're out to get me, is don't let the facts get in the way. So for people like you, journalists like you, networks like this, the job number one has got to be to constantly push through to the facts and the truth. What am I talking about? I'm talking about how on other platforms and networks, you'll never hear that DOJ attempted to talk for a year and a half with Trump and his attorneys about the classified material at Mar-a-Lago. You'll never hear that a subpoena was tried and failed. You won't hear that Trump's attorney filed a document with DOJ saying, we've given you all the documents, there are no more. You won't hear that, but you need to hear that, because if not, you're going to be like the people being duped who are going to donate to Trump, donate to his defense fund, show up at an FBI office in Phoenix or Cincinnati with an AR-15 slung around their shoulder, even willing to risk their lives, as the man did in Cincinnati, dying in a cornfield because he thought somehow the FBI was way out of bounds in executing a search warrant, denying the truth, unable to find the truth. So yes, riling up the base works for him, apparently, but it doesn't work for the base, because they end up getting arrested to the tune of well over 800, now approaching 1,000, for their involvement in January 6th, and even getting shot by Ohio State troopers in a cornfield.
I mean, Eugene, as always, Frank lays out the stakes so well, and there's a question that you and I have returned to over and over again, which is, at what point does GOP leadership decide enough is enough? This is the line. Apparently the line does not exist. The bottom does not exist. And I find that particularly interesting in a moment when we are seeing some of the limits of Trump's power as it comes to selecting candidates that can then win in a general election. So I wonder what you make, what you're hearing about the support for Trump among GOP lawmakers, while at the same time, they are saying out loud that they are worried that he could tank their chances in the midterms.
Yeah, one thing that you hear from them behind closed doors is that the same thing that we heard from Kevin McCarthy when, the book came out and all that audio came out right after January 6th, of him talking about how much he didn't like Donald Trump, right? He wanted him out of office, all of those types of things, that as he was going to go up to him and tell him to resign. Those are the kinds of things you hear behind closed doors, that they know that following Donald Trump they're worried about where that could lead the party. But then you see them in front of cameras, and that's completely different. There are some true believers, obviously, a lot of them in the House, but there are a lot of folks who are either scared of him and what he's going to do to them on Truth Social, no longer on Twitter, what kind of messages, email he's going to send to people like me, reporters who are going to tweet out of what he said about X, Y, and Z. Those are the kinds of things that you continue to hear. But then you have folks like Kevin McCarthy who are kind of too far gone. You were too, they are so in his tank that they can't change anymore, right? There's nothing that they can do to turn back. The time to do that has passed, and that was in January 6th. As soon as, the FBI began to search his home, you saw all of these Republicans, Kevin McCarthy, all of these other ones, immediately just take what Donald Trump had at face value. And since then, he's changed his tone 7 different times, right? At one point, he was saying that the FBI put things there, and that wasn't true, obviously. And so now Republicans have kind of stepped step back criticizing a little bit from the FBI. Definitely not seeing the defund the FBI that we saw immediately after. But what they also know is that Donald Trump is very good at using victimhood with his base, as Frank was just talking about. They know that as he moves forward, he's going to be able to talk about they're coming after me, but they're coming after you next. And no matter what, and this is something when you talk to Trump Republicans, and when I'm talking about people at his rallies, you say to them, how do you connect with someone who is a billionaire from New York and they feel like he's a blue-collar billionaire, whatever that means? And so he has been able to convince millions of people that he is on their side and that he's only upset with the FBI or everyone else because of what they're going to do to him and then you next. And it's hard to see how the Republican Party, even as they move forward and are getting more nervous about what's going to happen in these midterms, how they change that. And more importantly, how folks like Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger, who have been trying to quote unquote save the party, how they're going to be able to do that past 2022 and past 2024.
So, Charles, I wanted to start by talking about the stakes, which Frank laid out for us, the real world stakes of all of this, and then talk a little bit about the politics, because I think it is all important to understanding the legal maneuvers of both Team Trump and the government here. So one of Trump's lawyers says he plans to file a motion demanding a special master reviews the documents seized from Mar-a-Lago. Take a listen.
We need a special master. I mean, and that's a rare step when it comes to search warrants being executed. But this is something that we have to pursue. We have to get somebody in the middle, because we're not going to leave it to DOJ to tell us that they're doing their filter search and that they're the guardians of what's privileged or not.
I wonder, Charles, what you make of this legal maneuver. And when we talk about a case where it is actually important that everyone believes that it has been carried out in as careful a manner as possible, how this will play in.
You know, Alicia, when I listened to that statement, I think back to when Donald Trump was asked about whether he would agree to the peaceful transfer of power prior to the 2020 election. And what he said is, maybe, we'll see. And when I think about that, what I remember from what Frank and Eugene talked about is this notion of narrative control. Because early on here already, you already see Donald Trump and his legal team planting the seeds to basically suggest or give room or leave room for the lack of impartiality based off of whatever the results are. So now I've created enough space, whereas if I don't like the results, I have already made it a sort of a thing out there in the atmosphere that I can point to something being impartial and being unfair, again, to control the narrative for my followers, because Donald Trump is as concerned with the actual court of public opinion as much as he is the real court of law. And in doing that, he wants to control the narrative, and that's why you already see him trying to sort of plant these seeds to suggest the notion of impartiality, both on the DOJ, and I would not be surprised if things early on, if they were granted a special master and it wasn't going their way, to see the same thing made about the special master. All of this is a means of trying to control the narrative and remain in control of it and be flexible in a way where you can lead your followers wherever you want to go, regardless of the outcome of what happens in the court of law.